And it is my privilege now to introduce our next speaker, Janet Mock. Janet is a writer and activist who founded the Girlslikeus Project. She came out as a trans woman while working as an editor at people.com. Her advocacy work has been recognized by the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, the Center for American Progress, and the Women's Media Center. Please join us with a warm welcome to Janet Mock.
Hi, it's amazing to be here. There's 3 of me, right? Lucky you. I'm going to try to read from the podium, from these things here, but I have my speech here as well. It is so lovely to be here today with all of you. I want to especially thank Out and Equal for ensuring that I had a space to share my story. So I'm very grateful to all of you. And it's an honor to be able to be here. I'm a writer, as Renee said, and I wholeheartedly believe in the power of storytelling to enact personal and political change. I believe that each of our personal experiences can serve as what I like to call the root of our public podiums, enabling us to speak unspoken truths, connect with one another, and ultimately move forward towards progress and justice together. Many of us in this room, myself included, have chosen at one point or another in our lives to hide who we really are because of the threat of exile, rejection, or violence. I admit to having been silent about my identities and my truth for a while, and today I'm very proud that I've moved past that silence. And I stand here in front of all of you amazing people and advocates as a visible, proud, trans woman of color. Each time that I state my identity, it's never casual for me because I understand that anytime I enter a space and unapologetically link my womanhood and my color and my transness and my many multiplicities together, that there's power in that. And I hope that in hearing my experiences, you leave here understanding a bit more about the unique challenges many of us face, not only in being, but bringing our whole selves to all of the spaces that we enter. And I hope you leave with deeper insight and tools to return to your communities and your places of work and commit to creating more safe, welcoming, and affirming environments. So for those who are meeting me for the first time, welcome to my world. But I invited the world into my life in 2011 through a groundbreaking profile in Marie Claire magazine, where I shared my journey of growing up as a young trans girl. And in the piece, I wrote that I was my parents' firstborn son. I was the middle of 5 children growing up in a low-income neighborhood called Kalihi in Honolulu, Hawaii. I detailed the conflict that I experienced as a very young person about being feminine, about being different, about my gender identity. And after a long path filled with obstacles and limited resources, I transitioned through the halls of my high school, becoming, revealing, and being very open about who I was. I emerged from high school a woman, but most important, with a scholarship to college, to the University of Hawaii. And I had some really intense memories. I was the tuba player in marching band, by the way. So often I've always been the only in many spaces. But upon graduating from college, after studying media studies at University of Hawaii in 2005, I moved to New York City to attend graduate school at New York University, where I chose not to lead with the fact that I was trans. And it was so liberating to be another girl in a crowd, another 22-year-old, figuring out who I was beyond all the gender stuff. And it was the first time in my life when I was able to just be free, to discover what me really was. And with that privilege, that advantage that most people whose gender identity matches their assigned sex, that privilege that people take for granted, I was able to learn about storytelling from some of the nation's best journalists. I got internships at magazines I had read growing up. I earned my master's degree after becoming the first person in my family to even go to college. And I landed my dream job as an online editor for People magazine. And with my curls, my girls, and my cocktails in downtown Manhattan, I was living my Carrie Bradshaw-inspired dream. And during my time at People.com, I learned all that I know about journalism, about storytelling, about social media from my years at Time Inc. And I used those tools when I stepped forward at age 27 with my own story in Marie Claire. And that magazine profile changed the trajectory of my life. And I remember vividly how anxious I was about opening up about a part, a facet of my identity that I knew most people misunderstood. But I knew I had no other choice but to use my voice and to tell my story, because I needed to show that success is possible for young trans women if given the right resources and support, and two, to show that trans women are women and trans people are exactly who they say they are, no matter what media in our culture may have led you to believe. Most important, I told my story because I needed to be authentic about who I was and to create the affirmative story of a young, thriving trans woman, a story that I didn't have growing up. And honestly, upon entering and opening up to the world, I was terrified. I knew that people would judge me because young women like myself are deemed illegitimate and unnatural. Most are grappling with not having a home or health care, are pushed out of schools, don't have access to an education, and in that rare instance when we can find employment, they can still be legally fired in 33 states because of who they are. And because of these lack of non-discrimination protections, young trans women, specifically those from low-income or people of color communities, are often unable to support themselves without turning to the streets, which makes them all the more vulnerable to criminalization, further marginalization, and violence. And it was for these girls that I told my story. And I spoke up to show the world that we are capable of so much more. And regardless of my intentions, there was great risk in being so public about my identity, especially at work where I worried about my career being stalled after 5 years of service and sacrifice. Like I had to interview a few hot mess celebrities. That was like a lot of work. I caught myself, I was like, service and sacrifice. I was like, I worked at People.com. Okay, bring it down a notch. But like many people in this room, I didn't want to be reduced to my struggles, right? Yes, they helped me become who I am, but they've never defined me. I was afraid of being seen merely as a trans woman in the office rather than an astute editor and writer or the girl with the best hair in the office. But my boyfriend told me that one would work, so I did it. But I soon realized that how people saw me had nothing to do with me. It had to do with them and their perceptions. My job was to do my job and to continue to do it well. And 6 months after telling my story, I was promoted to senior editor at People magazine. Becoming part of senior management at one of the most respected brands in publishing. And rarely have I spoken about my experiences at People, and I often hear others citing me as a remarkable example of trans inclusivity in corporate America. But I must make something clear. my experience, my work experience, is not typical of most trans employees. First off, I transitioned in high school, not in the workplace, both of which have their very own unique set of challenges. And by the time I got to people.com, I had been living most of my life as my true self. Unlike sexuality, gender is visible. And we know that visible difference makes a difference. Not once in my life did I hide my gender. Ever since I was 13, I was very much a visible girl. But still, people assumed that I was in the closet at people.com because I blend in, and I chose not to lead with the fact that I was assigned male at birth. It's not really something you put on a resume. But many people expect you to, which is kind of bizarre. But for me, my challenges at work didn't have so much to do with me being trans, because oftentimes people perceive me as a non-trans woman. And negotiating space as a young woman of color in corporate America was already a lot to handle without adding on the added layer of being a young trans woman of color in corporate America. And what I found from my experiences is that most companies love to laud themselves about being inclusive of employees with single identities. They laud themselves, they talk about diversity, and they often are talking about single identity-focused people, right? Not those who embody multi-layered identities. And many companies pride themselves on being champions of diverse, inclusive environments, when in actuality, if you dig a little deeper, it turns out to be kind of lip service. Inclusivity is not a badge that we get to place on our websites to attract talent. It's a continual journey of education, intention, and action. Many trans people face verbal harassment and hostility from coworkers who most likely have never met a trans person in their lives. And dealing with that burden of having to educate their coworkers and employees can be a lot to handle in the midst of also going through some life changes, right? And I've noticed the ignorance of some very well-meaning people who ask the most ridiculous questions to coworkers. I've heard these stories about their gender or their genitals. The same kind of questions that if you asked to someone who was not trans would be grounds for reprimand, right? And coupled with a lack of bathroom accommodations, lack of trans-inclusive healthcare benefits, and lack of career advancement and promotion, in addition to the pervasive idea and stigma that trans people are unfit for life or work, it's no surprise that trans populations tend to be an overwhelmingly underemployed population. So how do we foster inclusive workplaces that are affirming of all kinds of people, right? Trans or non-trans? We can begin by asking ourselves these 5 questions. Is gender identity explicitly included in your company's non-discrimination and non-harassment policies? 2, does your company offer trans-inclusive healthcare coverage? 3, does everyone, regardless of their gender identity, have access to the restroom? 4, does your LGBT affinity group discuss sexual orientation and gender identity? These groups have the potential to be safe spaces and havens of support for trans employees who are often the only in the workplace and in need of allies. And 5, is someone on staff, or maybe even a consultant that you can get through Out and Equal, attuned to the unique challenges of the transition process, from name and medical coverage changes to confidentiality and record keeping? This person is essential in ensuring that employees and management have a destination for resources, training, and support. And with those questions in mind, I want you to know that being able to be on this stage and to share my story and my work with you is part of a larger dream of mine, one that has enabled me to banish the silence that I thought would protect me, a silence that told me that what I had to say didn't matter. And I've since conquered that silence and told my story through my writing and my media work, and my book coming out next year, Redefining Realness, the first memoir from a, yeah, you gotta plug that, the first from a young trans woman, is part of that dream coming true. And I look around this room and I heard the other speakers, and many of us in this room know intimately how it feels being the first. There's great accomplishment and distinction in earning that. But it isn't enough for us to be the first or to celebrate the first. True progress towards a more just world comes when the firsts are no longer the only or the last. Growing up, I dreamt of three things. I wanted to be a writer, to live in New York City, and to be unapologetically myself. Standing here, I know these dreams have been realized. And my dream now is that we challenge and expand our idea of diversity beyond a single identity-focused lens. We can only do this by working together to create a culture where we celebrate and advocate for those who may be multiracial, differently gendered, differently abled, attracted to all kinds of genders, even their own, and especially for the creation of a world where some employees can be all of the above in one fiercely talented body. Thank you.